Hi, I'm Wes, the Explosion, and this is the Backlog. An update on Wario Ware Get It Together, as I did get in a good bit of multiplayer this past week. As I said before, in past WarioWare titles, you would need to figure out on the fly what each microgame required and act accordingly, but here you need to do that on top of piecing together what character you have out at the time can do to accomplish the objective. Two-player co-op adds another layer on top of this, since in some microgames you want to work together, in others you want to try and win separately so that at least one of you reaches the goal. In still others, multiple people can get in each other's way, so you need to decide immediately which of you will go for it. Some also require both players to survive, while others only need one to stay in the game. It's just another chaotic element to contend with, and playing through the game a second time under these conditions was a whole new experience. On top of that, there are some extra games and modes that can only be played multiplayer. Many of these take inspiration from the GameCube's WarioWare, such as the one where you take turns playing, those not currently engaged trying to pump up a balloon to blow up on the one stuck in the microgame, or the one where you compete to complete games in order to claim territory on a board. There are also those where, rather than microgames, you take control of the various characters to compete in more open-ended challenges, such as volleyball or a straight-up fight. The latter in particular is quite a challenge, you switching between characters at set intervals, and some having distinct advantages. There was one time I was playing as Mona against Jimmy, and he just body-checked me into a corner, not letting me escape and just hammering away at my health until the timer called for the next set of characters. If it were any game other than WarioWare, I'd say it was unbalanced and crappily designed, but here it's just par for the course and I'm much more willing to accept the fate of RNG. So yeah, WarioWare Get It Together is still great, and I still recommend it to those up for a frantic pace. Whether co-op or versus, the multiplayer is fun as long as you don't take it too seriously. I played through Deltarune Chapter 2, so now no one can spoil it for me. Take that, Internet. I'll never forgive you for Undertale. And since I try not to be a hypocrite, I won't be showing anything from the new chapter. Instead, footage from the previous one that was released 3 years ago of an optional side boss that doesn't really play too heavily into the main story, at least not that I can tell, so this shouldn't spoil Chapter 2 or 1 for anyone. Anyway, Deltarune is a sequel, spin-off, alternate world, whatever, no one knows for sure outside of Toby Fox, of Undertale. In that you had turn-based RPG battles where you had to time your attacks and dodge enemy attacks in a bullet hell-esque sequence. You could also choose not to fight and try to convince your enemies to make peace, and how you chose to play the game affected the ending you got, with most people going for either one extreme or the other. You can do similar things in Deltarune, though there are two big differences. First, you have a party and can split duties in battle, like in many RPGs. The second is that you're told that your choices here don't matter, though at only 2 chapters in, they could very easily pull a fast one on you. Like in Undertale, the gameplay is fun, the visuals charming, the characters lovable, the writing clever and funny, and the music is magnificent, and more compliments that I'm just not thinking of at this point. The first chapter was an excellent start, and Chapter 2 hits the ground running, the premise and characters already established so that you can quickly get off on another adventure. The characters you already love are back, and it's fun to play with them again, and after getting reacquainted with them, the game begins on both expanding upon characters that were more in your periphery in the first, and introducing new ones for you to fall in love with. It also does a good job of giving players a tutorial, there being an optional part near the beginning that goes over the basics of combat that can serve as a refresher for those that haven't played in a bit, or a small challenge with a bit of a reward for those who still remember how to play. And then boom, almost immediately into the action. The whole thing just feels like Chapter 1, but more. More areas, more characters, more story, more music, more things I don't want to talk about just now. The whole thing just really feels like a natural evolution of what was already there, with pretty much everything that can be expanded on doing just that. It's not like some games where the exact same sprites are used with a few new enemies and maybe one new gimmick. This takes something that was already strong and just strengthens it further. I'd like to give some specific examples, but I don't really want to risk spoiling it for even a single person, so overall I'm just going to say that Deltarune Chapter 1 is great, and I think they somehow made Chapter 2 even better, and you should definitely play it. If the bullet hell stuff gives you too much trouble, look through playthroughs so that you can still experience it. It might seem overhyped, but that's only because some Undertale fans are ravenous, frothing at the mouth zealots who will sacrifice any dissenters on the altar of their weird cult-like religion, which isn't the game's fault. Both Undertale and Deltarune are some of the best, most straightforwardly good and enjoyable games I've ever played, so if you let a few from the fringe elements of the fandom scare you off, you're doing both the game and yourself a disservice. Also, Deltarune is free, which feels wrong. Sure, Chapter 1 took about 3 hours and 2 took 5, so they are only a fraction of what will hopefully eventually be a full game. But both are such an enjoyable experience that I kinda wish that Toby Fox had taken something for it. Maybe a set for life from Undertale and merchandise sales, I'm not sure, but somehow getting this second chapter for free feels wrong. And I have gotten some media at no cost through questionable means before, so normally I wouldn't be shy about this. Chapter 1 as a freebie made sense as a proof of concept sort of deal, but at this point I think you should start collecting something from it, especially considering how many people will likely stream it and get some cash off of it themselves. Maybe for Chapter 3, which I'm hoping won't take quite as long, they'll charge something, but I'm sure it'll be worth the wait regardless. I honestly thought that releasing the game in chunks like this would be a bit of a slog and make me lose interest, but it gave me time to play the first part a few times and really digest and appreciate it. And given that many probably thought that 2 would never happen, the announcement followed a few days later by a release was a big but very pleasant surprise. And I found that my fondness for the world and characters had not dimmed a bit. I played it all in one night, until after 1 in the morning, not wanting it to end, but also determined to get there so that I could see what happened. As well as wanting to avoid spoilers and to be able to talk about it for this week. The only real disappointment here was that I lost my save file for PC, so I didn't see most of the things that might have affected, though if it does get ported to Switch, I still have my file there. Something to look forward to in addition to Chapter 3. It was just such a lovely time. And then on to books. I read through We'll Save the Galaxy for Food by Yahtzee Croshaw. It's a sci-fi novel about an out-of-work star pilot whose career was destroyed like many others with the invention of cross-space teleportation gates. Desperate for work, he takes a job standing in for another pilot, not realizing at the time that the one he's impersonating is a famous author, despised by star pilots for taking their stories, adapting them into his novels, and making bank off of them while the origins of the tales live in poverty. The main character has to navigate not only his new questionable gig, but also the ire of his peers. I greatly enjoyed this book, perhaps the most out of all of Croshaw's work, which surprised me. I was kind of worried about it going into it, thinking that the blurb on the back made it sound a bit too much like a generic sci-fi adventure, and while there were certainly several of these elements there, Yahtzee's characters interacted with them to create a unique experience. As normal, each of them was likable but heavily flawed. I couldn't figure out whether the main character was the biggest fuck-up in the galaxy or its greatest adventurer. There was the abrasive and conniving Miss Warden, who was the main antagonist, but also kind of the love interest, maybe? There were the 2 tag-alongs, the boy who was obnoxious and bratty, but mostly good-natured, and the girl who seemed the most cognizant in most situations, but was too mild-mannered to say anything. The villain was intimidating, but still had some sense of humanity, and there was the hero that represented the despair of the fall of star piloting, but also the hope that it might still have a future. And besides that, the action was harrowing, there were mysteries to guess at, and the pacing was good enough that I never wanted to put it down for too long. Overall, just a very solid piece of work. If you like sci-fi but with a bit of a dry, sarcastic wit, this is a great book to pick up. I also finished the 3rd volume of bottom-tier character Tomozaki by Yuki Yaku. Even less Smash Bros in this one, but given that this was just a pretense rather than the focus, it kinda makes sense that they'd get further away from it. In Volume 3, characters are further expounded upon, Tomozaki progresses further towards his goals, and one of the main character dynamics gets shaken up considerably, making it seem like things will get changed up dramatically going forward, and I continue to be intrigued. Of course, with this being Volume 3, I can't really talk too much in the way of specifics without major spoilers, so let's switch tracks and talk about the anime. I finished the main 12 episodes and the 2 OVAs. As I said before, it's alright. Watching didn't feel like a waste of time, but it didn't wow me enough that, had I watched it first, I would have felt compelled to seek out the source material. So, I feel quite thankful that I stumbled upon this in the order that I did. It was super interesting being able to compare the two though, seeing what worked better in text, what was better animated, what parts were focused on, and what were cut. The last in particular really stood out as some were cut for obvious runtime reasons, but others seemed to be skipped due to them not being relevant to what the 12 episodes were covering and would probably only come into play in a second season, which is rarely guaranteed. One other thing that stood out to me was that some of the mental gymnastics that the characters do near the end of the Volume 3 were a little hard to follow in text, but somehow hearing basically the same thing out loud made a lot more sense. I guess the whole point of my little tangent is that I find it interesting to compare how the same work can be adapted differently between two mediums. Maybe I'm the only one, but seeing the two side by side had me get more out of both than I would have experienced with them separately. Also, I think I've used this Mega Man Smash video as much as I should, so if I continue to read the series, I might want to record another instead. Maybe Min Min, maybe Pyra and Mithra. And that'll do it. Very positive week. Thanks for watching, maybe subscribe if you enjoy this sort of thing, and perhaps I'll see you in the next episode.